All right, welcome to OK Computer. I'm Dan Nathan, joined by Deirdre Bosa. She is the host of CNBC's Tech Check. Debo, welcome to the pod.
Hi, Dan. Happy to be here.
All right, we got so much to talk about. I know that this has been a very, very busy few days for you. But after our conversation, I sit down with Matt Turck. He is a partner at FirstMark Capital. He is an investor in the AI space and has been for a long time. He's also the host of the podcast, Mad Podcast with Matt Turck, and he and I go over just this whole OpenAI Microsoft saga, really through the lens of a private markets investor. And obviously, we spent a lot of time talking about what it means for the public market ecosystem. You and I are going to do all that too, but I'm really interested in hearing about just some of the conversations, obviously on background. This was kind of a seismic sort of shakeup in the AI, both private and public markets space. And I think you have a really interesting take. I've been watching you on Twitter. I've been watching you on CNBC. How this thing is unfolding, but really just the implications across both the public and the private markets, because it's been really, really interesting. But what were some of your first takes? Because when this came out on Friday, I just don't think there was like any hint that there was something like going to go down in the way in which it did. And really, days later, here we are. We're recording this Tuesday afternoon, and there doesn't seem to be like a whole heck of a lot of progress or a lot of answers.
Yeah, I'll say the first thing is that we still don't know why the board took the actions that they did. A lot has been speculated, but you're right, Dan. When this dropped on Friday, I had not taken off for the day, luckily. And the first thing I saw was Sam Altman's out. I said, okay. And then I read the statement from the board, which is when my jaw really dropped, because in no uncertain terms, they kind of put the blame on Sam Altman himself, the golden boy, the golden child of Silicon Valley and generative AI, and made it seem like he wasn't being forthcoming or transparent with the board. So that just led to an absolutely wild weekend of speculation, of everyone frantically trying to get answers, and a lot of people rushing to Sam Altman's defense, a few others saying maybe there was some questionable stuff in the past. And I don't know that we know many answers at this point. You even had, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella doing the media rounds. He came on CNBC last night and saying, not a whole lot. I will say he did not say a whole lot after tweeting in the very early hours of the morning that Sam Altman was going to Microsoft. That wasn't the case, and we still don't know where that stands.
Yeah, so he did the rounds. Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. Because it was during Fast Money, and so John Fort had Satya on there. He asked him, a handful of questions. There weren't too many specific answers. It didn't even seem like he was prepared to say that Sam Altman and Greg Brockman were actually employees of Microsoft at that point. So it seemed like a lot of stuff was still up in the air. What do you think was behind that at that moment? I know he went on Kara Swisher's podcast. He went on a whole host of other things on Bloomberg and the like there. What was the goal if he didn't have a lot of answers, right, to questions that folks like you and I want to know? Why did he spend a lot of time speaking to the press last night on Monday?
In one word, and this particularly relates to why he would come on CNBC, reassurance. Microsoft's entire business is modeled around the cloud, and they have the number 2 position behind Amazon, but they're growing faster. They have a lot at stake here. And to lead in cloud right now and in the future, you need to be seen as having the best generative AI products, even if not a lot of your customers are using them. They're interested in using them, and they know that this is a technological shift that they can't miss. So Satya Nadella has done a very good job this year of coming out and saying, we're on top of this trend. We have partnered, and we have in many ways the exclusive partnership with the darling in this space, OpenAI. And I think that that's been a big boon to their cloud business. And that's sort of how they're modeling growth going forward. So Satya Nadella had to come on CNBC and essentially reassure customers, because you can bet that Amazon and Google are going out right now and talking to many of their customers saying, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. At the very least, you need to, have some of your processes on our cloud as well. We have also been developing generative AI tools. And I think that OpenAI has said in the past that they have, more than 90% of Fortune 500 companies. And because the way the partnership works, they have to go through Azure, right? So that's customers, that's revenue for Microsoft's Azure cloud business. And I think that's just as important to note here as the generative AI tools, which are still being pioneered.
Yeah, it's interesting. So that's a great point. And when you think about Azure and you think about the growth that they just put up, in that last quarter, 29%, I think you've highlighted this on many occasions on the pod, AWS, which is the market share leader, they're growing at less than half that rate, right? So, for Microsoft, this has been a huge boon, like to have the tools and the technology, the IP from OpenAI integrated into a lot of their products and services, but then also when you talk about 90% of the Fortune 500 or whatever, which are Microsoft, customers who actually want to be testing these tools, and the gateway to testing those tools is through Microsoft's cloud. I mean, that seems like a pretty good do on their part, right? And so the idea that Satya needs to get out there and do a bit of damage control when it feels like OpenAI is employing, or at least their best talent, because really it's one thing for them to have access to that IP, but if that IP does not continue to grow and get better, right, through that relationship,
Yep.
it really is going to be the sort of thing where a lot of those customers will look to kind of have multiple sources, right, of access to these
Mhm.
sorts of competitive tools on different cloud platforms.
And it was also to go out there for that exact point, right? Right now, a talent war is going on. Every company that is developing generative AI is looking to poach the employees that are willing to leave OpenAI now and don't know what the future of that startup or research lab, whatever you want to call it, looks like. You had Benioff, right, publicly on Twitter, and people from Microsoft publicly on Twitter, but behind the scenes, I mean, it is a scramble. I spoke to a startup founder yesterday who said that if you're not reaching out to those OpenAI employees, you have a bad AI team in the first place. So there's just that massive rush. And, probably Satya Nadella could come on TV and make that case. And that was really his central message, is that we have the resources to do so, because as we've talked about, Dan, this is a shift that requires billions of dollars in compute power, which Microsoft has access to, again, through the cloud. All roads lead to the cloud.
Yeah, so it's interesting. The initial market reaction Friday afternoon was to sell Microsoft off a little bit, and again from an all-time high. To be very clear, $2.8 trillion market cap. Okay, it got back there before Apple has gotten back to its all-time highs. It's basically dragging up large parts of the Nasdaq with it, and Alphabet, Google sold off. Now on Monday, when it appeared that this coup resulted in a actual coup for Microsoft, getting the CEO, the president, and maybe large parts of that kind of employee base, Microsoft started going back higher. And then obviously there's a little pressure on some of their public market competitors. What is your thought, though? There's been some folks out there opining on Twitter and the like here that this puts Microsoft actually in a much worse position to actually have all of these engineers and the management of this, what was meant to be a nonprofit, right? So they had this kind of arm's length agreement as far as their ownership of this entity, but they had access to all the IP. What are your thoughts on the fact that maybe they are in a worse position if they have to
Mhm.
they actually have to bring all of this in-house, right? Like what does that do for Microsoft and their ability? Because we know that there's two, I think the folks out there in Silicon Valley are calling them tribes, right? Like those who want to actually
Mhm.
kind of tap the brake a little bit, make sure they're doing this in a really responsible manner, and then those who just want to commercialize as much of this
Right.
technology as possible, and start letting it drop to the bottom line.
Yeah, and that's really at the crux of this issue. I mean, as we started this podcast, we said that there's still so much unknown. The fact that people are out there saying that this was, a brilliant move by Microsoft and Satya Nadella, and they're the undisputed winners of this saga. I think it's just way too early to tell. You bring up some of the risks. If OpenAI or, its key people go to Microsoft, there's reputational and executional risk that goes along with that. ChatGPT is far, far from perfect. It hallucinates. And
Yeah.
you could chalk that up to say, okay, it's hallucinating, but this is a research lab. They're trying to figure out and they're trying to figure it all out. And at the core of their belief is doing it right and protecting humanity. Now, Microsoft, a for profit company, is going to have to take on that risk. And we just don't know what the use cases are and how these chatbots are going to develop. So Microsoft, can no longer put its hands up and say, that's the research lab, it's not us.
Yeah.
If they're so integrated, they have to execute on it as well. And I think also the idea that are all these engineers, data scientists from OpenAI going to want to stay at Microsoft 3 years from now, 4 years from now, even 1 year from now? I mean, in Silicon Valley, people on Wall Street chuckle at this, but there is this sort of high minded, altruistic idea that when you're an entrepreneur here or even an investor, you start a company, the goal is to disrupt the status quo, change the world. And that's very much at the center of OpenAI's charter. When you go to Microsoft, the calculus is a little bit different. Satya Nadella can say all he wants that they want to achieve the same things, but this is a company that answers to shareholders. It's public. And it was interesting because Sam Altman, just a few weeks ago, he gave an interview to the Financial Times. He said essentially that they can't do what they want to do with a last generation technology company. So it's kind of a 180. And I'm not commenting on that. I'm saying that maybe that is the way to get things done. And maybe that's what happened. There's been compromises along the way, but there's certainly no shortage of risk in it for Microsoft.
It's interesting to me, and I like the contrarian take that we just quoted here, but I actually want to probably go with the consensus here. And I said it on Fast Money on Monday, and kind of in my conversation with Matt Turck, we talked about this. I think at some point next year, Microsoft will overtake Apple in market cap and might never, ever look back. And I just think about this. If they are able to kind of integrate large parts of this team and they're able to give them the sort of autonomy that Satya is talking about, and he's, kind of highlighted a couple recent acquisitions in the tech space. And I think a lot of folks will think, they'll look at LinkedIn and say that was, Satya's first successful M&A and integration here. And, he's been there for about 10 years. And I'm sure at some point the idea of succession makes some sort of sense. And maybe Sam Altman fits into that plan, if you will. I know listen, again, I'm trying to be, a little bit optimistic here, but I think of a company that's doing $250 billion in sales. It's got a 65% gross margin, and you think they're nowhere in consumer sort of facing sort of businesses. So, again, one of the big things earlier this year, and you and I talked a lot about, if Bing was ever able to integrate a bunch of this technology and take meaningful share from Google, and then really, but the focus for you and I has been on what does it mean for their enterprise businesses, right? What does it mean for their competition? With Google for productivity? What does it mean for their competition with AWS and cloud? And I could put together a bit of a mosaic where this really kind of supercharges this company's margins over the next few years and really sets a succession plan. Who knows? Again, this is a company that missed some of the biggest platform shifts. If you think about internet, and if you think about mobile going back over the last 25 years, and I think Satya has set his sights on never letting that happen again. So again, we have so few answers. Who knows? This is just purely my speculation.
Dan, I don't disagree with you. I think that this could create a really interesting proposition. I think that the nonprofit model was, one of these pie in the sky Silicon Valley ideas that in practice didn't deliver. And I don't know, maybe Anthropic will find a way for it to do so, but I have my own skepticism. And when you talk about Microsoft needing that consumer facing product, I mean, we haven't seen anything like ChatGPT, just the user growth and the mainstream adoption. And remember too that Sam Altman, at least according to reports, has been thinking about hardware, has been thinking about a new device. So if Satya Nadella is determined not to miss this one, I mean, he's putting his money where his mouth is.
Yeah, no doubt. And then, to your point about hardware, I mean, that was this, Sam Altman was supposedly, and this might have been something else that ruffled the board's feathers, right? Is that he was in Saudi Arabia recently and looking to raise billions of dollars for, hardware, but also for designing chips to compete with NVIDIA. And I think they even enlisted Johnny Ive, the ex-Apple designer, Steve Jobs' muse for so long and so many of these big products in a way. And so, listen, if this is the sort of, team that has those sorts of big ideas and can help implement those, inside Microsoft, maybe it is the opportunity to kind of reassert themselves on one of the biggest platform shifts that we can all agree, is likely to take place in technology, over the next few years. Dee, were there any, I know you've been on the phone. I know you've been, talking a whole host of different folks. Any other big takeaways that our listeners should kind of think about in the background, especially as this is all going to kind of play itself out probably over the next few days or weeks before the dust really settles. Is there anything from, a market's perspective that you think people should kind of keep in some sort of context? Matt Turck and I, at the very end, after about 30 minutes of talking, we finally got to Meta, and you and I have talked about Llama and the open source approach, or what Amazon might be doing and thinking about. They've been tripping over, Alphabet to invest in Anthropic. There's also been talks about potential, the OpenAI board went to the Anthropic founder, who's ex-OpenAI, to see if they were interested in a merger
It's
or
just
him.
wild.
Yeah, it's a lot of wild stuff. So I'm just curious, anything out of left field that you think we should kind of keep our eyes open to over the next few days as this kind of plays out?
One of the topics I've discussed so much here in the Bay Area over the past year is this idea of big tech getting bigger. And do the startups even have a chance because of the way that generative AI is developing? It requires just enormous amounts of compute power. And I think that is as relevant today as it was a week ago. Is it possible for startups, especially a different kind of startup, to exist in this shift? And the events of the last few days has made it clear that big tech has its grasp on this. And some are calling what Microsoft was able to do, a $0 acquisition at the end of the day with no regulatory scrutiny. And I saw Lena Khan, the chair of the FTC, she did a listening tour through the Bay Area just a few weeks ago. I saw her speak at Y Combinator. And there was sort of this open question. A lot of startups were in the room. They said, how are you going to help us compete? On the other side, though, some startups say that it's really good that big tech can subsidize the compute power that they need to build applications on top of this massive technology change. So that's something that I think is important to keep an eye on. And, the markets have very much telegraphed the picks and shovels of this, the NVIDIA and the chip names that are going to benefit. But what comes next is the infrastructure. Companies like Databricks and Snowflake and I wonder what role they're going to play. If it's necessarily just going to go to the big players, maybe there's a chance for them. So that'll be interesting to see how
it's okay. Okay, Dee, just as I'm sure I'm going to get you for like 1 or 2 more minutes because this is crossing the wires right now, and you're going to get really busy here. So here's a headline: Altman, OpenAI board open talks for his possible return. Altman now in communication with board member D'Angelo. I think it's interesting that Satya Nadella specifically mentioned in those interviews that he knows that one board member in particular. I think he is the CEO, founder of Quora, and has worked with him. Yeah. So I wonder, to all of the stuff that we've just been talking about, whether Satya Nadella agrees with you that he thinks it's better that Sam and team are actually back at OpenAI with better oversight, with better governance, with more actual, like Microsoft will most definitely have board seats here, and that board will look very different. Quick take on that, because I know you probably have to get back to reporting.
I think that makes a whole lot of sense. These companies began as research labs for a reason, even if they become profitable, as Microsoft would like to have those incentives more aligned. That's probably best case scenario for Satya Nadella and Microsoft. All the benefits of OpenAI and Sam Altman, while not directly having them under their purview, with the risk that comes along with that, reputational and execution.
Yeah, and just another headline that's crossing as possible outcome: adding Altman to transitional OpenAI board. So this is going to be something that Microsoft will have that arm's length sort of kind of for anything that goes wrong, but they're also going to have a lot of control on what happens from here on out. Listen, Debo, I really appreciate you making the time for this conversation. I love your perspectives here. So next week, I'm sure we're going to have a lot more to talk about. I hope you can come back. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving. I think you're going to be on the phone a lot over the next few days.
Yes, no doubt. We'll see where we are next week. Who knows? I mean, this is the year that tech keeps giving us these massive stories and ruining my weekend. So we'll see if that happens again. Thanks for having me, as always.
All right, Debo. Thanks a lot. All right, everyone, stick around for my conversation with Matt Turck, partner over there at FirstMark Capital. All right, welcome back to OK Computer. I am joined by Matt Turck. He is a partner at FirstMark Capital here in New York City. He is also the host of the Mad podcast with Matt Turck. You can find that in your favorite podcast store. Matt, I want to get to all that. You were last on the pod, though, when you released, I think it was your 10th annual MAD report, which your podcast is kind of named after. That's machine learning, AI, and data. This is something you've done every year for the last 10 years since you've been at FirstMark. And we spent a lot of time, Rick, your partner, was on that last show with us. You guys were not Johnny-come-latelys to this space. This is something that you have been very passionate about, first as an entrepreneur and obviously as an early stage investor for a very long time. So everything that's going on with OpenAI and Microsoft and in the ecosystem, I'm sure you've been on the horn, you know what I mean, with your peers, with companies that you're advising, invested in. I know you're on the board of a bunch of companies, DataIQ and Synthesia, and we're going to get to all that stuff. So talk to us a little bit about how this last few days, put it in some sort of context, as long as you've been in tech, as long as you've been a tech investor. To me, when I saw that headline Friday afternoon, I was preparing to go on to CNBC's Fast Money, I was kind of like, holy shit. And that's not because it's some big market moving thing in the public markets. I'm like, when you just think about what happened, that is not something that occurs too frequently when a board of a nonprofit that runs a for-profit thing that is CEO and co-founded by one of the kind of most famous, poster children for this emerging technology. It was kind of a seismic move that happened Friday afternoon.
Yeah, like a lot of people in tech, I got nothing done on Saturday and Sunday. My productivity level went to zero as I was basically doom scrolling through Twitter or X all day. I mean, it's, you can make this up, right? This is like a telenovela or like a hurricane of news, but it's really a story that has everything: greed and fear and ambition and betrayal, and it's just amazing. Some very important questions are still unanswered. Like, okay, who's going to play Sam Altman in the movie?
Yes, obviously.
When is the movie coming out?
Yes, probably Michael Cera, maybe. I don't know. What do you think about that? That's a good one. Well, listen, one of the things that I wanted to kind of get you over here and get you on the mic here is because I know this is a space that you've obviously, invested in and you're very involved in, but it's also something that you know a whole heck of a lot about. And I don't want to really do what everyone else is doing as far as like the boardroom drama and the kind of, all that sort of stuff, because it's still playing out. We had Satya Nadella was on Fast Money last night while we were doing the show on CNBC. John Ford had a great interview with him. I think it was his first interview that he did. And it's interesting, aside from support for Sam, support for their mission with OpenAI, there wasn't a lot of clarity on what's going on. So no one knows how this is going to shake out. So I'd really love this conversation to focus a bit on how, like, let's say private market investors should think about this and public market investors. When I think about the NASDAQ, which is basically back to its January 2022 highs or so, a lot of that has been driven by, let's call it 10 stocks that are, half of them are, above $1 trillion, above $2 trillion, you know what I mean? Or very much nearing $1 trillion, and a lot about excitement about AI and how it's going to be integrated into their platforms, products, and services and the like. So I think there's a lot at stake. And then you and I were talking before we turned the mics on, there's tens of billions, maybe hundreds of billions that have been allocated towards companies in the private markets globally over, let's call it, the last 12 to 18 months or so. So there's some big implications, because how this shakes out is going to really define, I think, who a lot of these companies are working with, where they get funding from, who they're run by, and the like here. So let's get into it a little bit, because what are your first impressions? What are some of the all right, let's start with this. You advise companies. You're invested in early stage. They're partnered with OpenAI, with Anthropic, with some of these other companies. What was the first reaction to kind of the news and how things? Let's make the assumption here that there's one or two things that are going to happen. OpenAI either is going to implode and all that talent is going to, let's say, or a lot of it's going to go to Microsoft, and it probably ends up at Anthropic, Cohere, Alphabet, like a bunch of Amazon, possibly Salesforce and the like here. Or the team goes back with a new board and they're back to their mission. It's maybe a stronger, more viable entity going forward. Okay, how are you thinking about advising the companies in your portfolio right now on those two outcomes?
Yeah, I think from a startup perspective and the VC perspective, I think overall, in a weird way, that's sort of good news.
Yeah.
I think it just opens up the playing field in a way that I think is good for innovation altogether. What makes the story particularly poignant and interesting is that, from my perspective, OpenAI had reached its all-time high just a few days before all of this went down, right? That was the OpenAI Dev Day. And look, we can discuss whether OpenAI at that Dev Day sort of, showed clearly to the world that it had completely moved away from its original mission, which may or may not have been precipitated the events. But regardless, it was just awesome to watch, and the level of ambition at OpenAI just was amazing. So if you think about it, OpenAI, especially at Dev Day, showed how it wanted to be the best company in consumer AI, but also in enterprise AI, and also be the best AI company for developers. So if you think of startups normally going from, one niche, going to one audience, and then expanding to the next one, and then expanding to the next one over a journey of 10 years, OpenAI was trying to do all the things for all people and basically sucking the air out of the room. And from a VC perspective that invests in companies that are trying to do all the things, that was pretty terrifying, to be perfectly honest. And the fact that this, I think, is going to go away one way or the other, I think is good news. Opens up lots of opportunities for entrepreneurs.
All right, so that's really fascinating. So as an investor in startups, you found it kind of scary because ultimately the thing that popularized OpenAI was the release of ChatGPT-4, which was a consumer-facing product that actually had massive adoption, right? It was one of the quickest apps ever to, 100 million, it's doing $1 billion in revenue. And as far as enterprise solutions, that was really what the partnership with Microsoft was about, right? Yep. And so when you think about that, we've been talking about it on CNBC the last couple of days, again, through the lens of like what it means for Microsoft or Amazon or, Alphabet or whatever, to me is like, the consumer applications of ChatGPT were a bit of a sideshow. It was always going to be what it means for enterprise, what it means for a company like Microsoft that has $250 billion in revenue, a lot of it recurring. How do you make that stickier? How do you charge more for a bunch of those services and the like here? So let's talk a little bit about, again, where have you been focused as far as AI? Have you been more interested in enterprise, or is it some of the consumer facing sort of products? I know at FirstMark you guys have tremendous history investing in consumer facing sort of digitized products and stuff. So how do you shake out in that regard, consumer versus enterprise?
Yeah, so as investors we're interested in both consumer and enterprise, me personally I'm more interested in enterprise. I think there's a whole world of exciting vertical AI applications that one can build. AI for health, AI for finance, and so on and so forth. Which, as long as you do work at the model level, sort of full stack manner, I think you can build very interesting and differentiated and sustainable, defensible companies. So that's certainly an area that we have been watching. I think what's happening with OpenAI is also opening a whole world of kind of that middle layer of orchestration and operations, which was in the process of being taken over by OpenAI, and I think that's really interesting.
So going back to the Dev Day, what scared you about it is, again, if you're trying to find great talent, right, and trying to find, working on new ideas and getting in early, that sort of thing. When you looked at the Dev Day, you just saw them crowding out a lot of this capability, because essentially what they're doing is saying, here's our technology, here's the things that you can do with it. There's a lot of folks in tech who were just floored by it. It was like, a lot of the commentary was like, we haven't seen, one of these kind of keynote product addresses since, Steve Jobs, you know what I mean? Like introducing the whiz-bang iPhone or this and that, whatever. And so all of a sudden, it's like, okay, the Sam was like the anointed one, and it got a lot of people excited. And I'm sure the techie in you was kind of excited, but the investor was like, oh my goodness, here's a company that has unlimited funds, essentially because Microsoft will continue coming back, right, and funding their operations, and therefore a lot of the innovation for the first time in a while might likely come from incumbents. Is that the way you were thinking of it, not from the startup community?
Yeah, you mentioned my Mad Annual Landscape, which if anybody has not come across it, is one of these kind of market maps, except it's, for data, machine learning, and AI. So it has like 1,400 companies. So it's like, a little bit of an eye chart with thousands of logos. And actually tweeted, after Dev Day, like sort of memed that. And I took a screenshot of the 2023 version, which has all the logos. And then next to it, I put a 24 version where there was no logo except for OpenAI. And that was going to be the 2024 version. And I said, well, that's going to be easier to make this year.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the dominant feeling. But I think that's going away. And by the way, I don't think there is a going back to the way things were before, regardless of the scenario. I think that's different. A lot of people have, rightly so, praised Satya for like pulling off the corporate move of the century. And a lot of people are calling him the GOAT, and like, look, certainly extraordinarily impressive CEO. But I don't think that Microsoft is better off with Sam and Greg moving to their lab. No, I have a little bit of a different view. So first of all, I find it very hard to believe that Sam and Greg and whoever moves there is going to stick around for a very long time.
Yeah.
It's always a problem. And second, the whole genius of the setup of having Microsoft being effectively the main backer and sort of driving things a little bit behind the scenes with OpenAI was that it basically gave Microsoft a license to innovate without all the risks attached, right? So that the
on the trust and safety side, and basically a broader direction. And it seems like that those are the issues that actually caused this sort of implosion over at OpenAI. And the last thing you'd want to do is see that all playing out at a $2.8 trillion market cap company.
Yeah, exactly.
And hundreds of funds. All what I mean. That's
Microsoft, that the Tay fiasco, that bot that ended up insulting folks. Meta had its Galactica problem, and Google. I mean, the whole irony of the whole thing, as we all know, is that a lot of the transformer architecture that led to GPT and all of the things was started at Google, but Google kept it inside for many years and decided not to release it precisely out of concern that they would get in trouble. There was like the Duplex release, if you remember that, that also got Google into some price. So the whole genius of the setup was like Microsoft said, well, okay, you go do the crazy stuff, and we'll pull the strings behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And now they can no longer do that. So I actually think that if you think of the kind of the coup at OpenAI as the decel part of the AI ecosystem trying to slow things down, I actually think they have succeeded because Sam and Greg and whoever at Microsoft is not going to be able to innovate with the same level of freedom as they were up until last Friday.
Yeah, and it's interesting, that whole decel movement, it's like that was the thing that was playing out within OpenAI, and it was like, it seemed like in hindsight now, it was always going to come to a head, unless Sam and his, what do they call them, tribe, you know what I mean, were able just to kind of run ramshot. But that being said, if Sam and Greg and the whole thing, if they come back and it's a new board, so as of this, we're recording this Tuesday morning, I think as of last night, 700 of the 770 employees had signed a letter. This is at OpenAI. If the board doesn't resign and they don't bring those folks back, they're leaving, okay? And then you're going to have this massive diaspora. I'm sure hundreds will go to Microsoft. And listen, if hundreds go to Microsoft, I think the likelihood that Microsoft and that team stay there for a while are probably pretty good. And like, that's my thing. And then some of the fears about, like the pace in which innovation is going and who's at risk for this and that, whatever, I think they dissipate a little bit. In my personal opinion, I think public investors are probably going to give them a pass here, because when I think about this whole enterprise opportunity versus, let's say, what's going on in the consumer side, I'd almost say, okay, let Alphabet, let Google, and let some of these other folks deal with the consumer stuff. We're thinking about our installed base and how to make it more productive and more profitable and the like, and integrating this sort of technology across thousands and thousands of enterprises around the world. You know what I mean? Yep. And this, to me, my first blush is like, Oh man, Microsoft's been nipping at Apple's heels for the largest market cap company in the world. And now, if this team really is there, and they really are going to be putting this in every part of this, operation over at Microsoft. Microsoft next year will overtake Apple in market cap, and they will never look back. I'm just that's my personal take on that.
Yeah, and those two things can be true at the same time,
that's
right?
Yeah.
You can take whatever OpenAI has built to date and roll it out in the enterprise, and that's certainly going to lead to extraordinary value.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it can also be true that the pace of sort of frontier innovation is going to slow down because Microsoft cannot take the risk of doing anything too crazy.
But it's funny, think about it this way. Let's just say in a perfect world, it seems like Satya and Sam have a bit of a bromance. Let's assume that there was nothing really unsavory about his departure from Y Combinator, and then really, some of the initial suggestions of why he was fired, that sort of thing. I mean, Sam Altman could in 5 years become CEO of Microsoft, which is the first $5 trillion market cap company, or so. You know what I mean? Like there's a story there, in my opinion. You know what I mean? So
it's very possible.
Yeah.
And by the way, I gotta say, like if we think about the winners and the losers in the whole thing, I mean, Sam is to me the biggest winner, even though he got fired, because it's really been the coronation of Sam as the rightful heir of Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
And he's behaved superbly, very much above the fray during the last few days. And, those hundreds of OpenAI, loyalists just wanting to quit the job and follow them. Granted, OpenAI might be a sinking ship, but that's just a beautiful thing to watch. And that's been an amazing weekend for him.
It's funny. That was my first take Friday at 5 o'clock on CNBC's Fast Money. Our host came to me and I just said, listen, this guy has been literally the poster child. He's minted, more billionaires, like let's say in Silicon Valley, through his experience through Y Combinator, his ability to kind of access and recruit and retain talent, at OpenAI has been something really unique in a way. And I know folks like you, because as you're advising your companies and talent is a big part of that, right? So at an early stage, like how do you get and keep the best people at an early stage, company? They always get, big deals, dangled in front of them from some of the large public companies. Yeah. And then, OpenAI was just a different sort of ball of wax. I want to go back to the Microsoft thing and some of the stuff that surprises you. This was a tweet from Bill Gurley. This is Monday. Okay. If you told me 10 years ago that a group of the smartest engineers in the land would evoke the threat, do I want to stay or will I go to work at Microsoft? I would not have believed you. Amazing shift in corporate reputation, and much credit to Satya. So again, Sam, as you said, looks great. Satya is looking pretty good too right now. So talk to me about just that from a VC perspective, the way Gurley just kind of lays it out. Is the landscape sort of shifting, or has it been shifting? And again, when you think of your MAD report that you put out earlier this year, and when we last potted, we were talking about it, the interactivity of it is really fascinating. I think that was the first time you did that. When you play around with it, there's a lot of these huge, publicly traded platform companies that are really dominating in the space. And is that a big shift? You know what I mean? Are we going to start seeing safety in these large numbers?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, it's a very different story for all AI startups than prior waves of cloud computing or mobile. In that the incumbents that you're fighting against are not the prototypical lazy incumbents. They are, in fact, where a lot of this innovation came from in the first place. We mentioned Google earlier. And they are tech companies, and some of them were startups not that long ago. And their level of reactivity to this whole wave has been, pretty impressive to watch. Look, I'm a VC. I guess the term of the day is I'm a techno optimist, and I always think that startups find a way, and there's plenty of opportunities to build, but perhaps not as much as everybody thought when ChatGPT came out and there was going to be a startup for everything. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities, but maybe not for every single product out there.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because again, Microsoft, if you go back and think about 20 years ago, they were, and I think this is Gurley's point too, is like they were the opposite of that. I mean, they missed two of the biggest platform shifts if you think about it. Obviously they missed the internet, really, for all intents and purposes. They missed mobile, and it wasn't until they booted Ballmer, 10 years ago or so, and Satya took over, and he really mapped a very, very different course. And I go back to, I remember thinking at the time that acquisition of LinkedIn was one of the largest tech acquisitions ever, right? In the end, it was $27 billion or something like that. And, a lot of us, like pundits like me or whatever, public markets guys, we thought it was really silly. We thought it was a high price to pay. If you looked at their track record with M&A, they were historically horrible at it. You know what I mean? In large deals and the like. And when you think about the 10 years that's occurred, I mean, he's really been kind of a really sleepy sort of figure, but doing almost everything right as it relates to building out cloud and what that meant for machine learning and AI and the like. And here we are, we're at like a crossroads right here, and for all intents and purposes, you'd be a fool to bet against them. That doesn't mean buying or selling the stock right here. So let's think about, how does this play out? How are you thinking about, assuming we don't know the outcomes, but right now, what does it mean for Google? You know what I mean? What does it mean for Amazon? They've been tripping over each other to invest in Anthropic. Does one of them try to buy Anthropic? You know what I mean? I think the last invested in like $20 billion, at a multiple of sales, which makes no sense. But there's Cohere. There's a bunch of other companies that might do the same job. If OpenAI is swallowed up by Microsoft, are we going to see a lot of M&A from some of Microsoft's public market competitors in the space?
Yeah, look, I don't necessarily think so. I think those companies are going to be extremely expensive. And, Anthropic already has its own full cap table and investors and all the things. It's a very different animal from everything I know. I think, we were saying a minute earlier that all of this opens up opportunities for startups. I think it very much opens up opportunities for large public companies as well. And Google, that had ironically, again, sort of fallen behind as an opportunity to catch up. I think that's true for a lot of other companies. I think, AWS has been the big open question from my perspective. That they, have a nice alliance with Hugging Face, but otherwise, feel like they've been behind. I think Salesforce is trying very, very hard. Mark Benioff made offers to OpenAI researchers to match their comp if they join and all the things, so that everybody's trying very hard. But I think that effectively gives an opportunity for everybody to catch up. So now, are they going to buy startups? I think I don't think so. I think that's a little early, and I think we're just in the early innings of this whole story. So that will eventually happen, but not just yet.
No doubt. And so what do you think of the opportunities? I have to assume that there's a lot of folks that, a lot of these researchers, a lot of these data scientists, a lot of these entrepreneurs in the space, maybe they don't care that much about money, I mean, like Sam Altman didn't own any shares, supposedly in OpenAI, and this is a company that since he's been the CEO has gone from zero to $86 billion. Just think of that in paper wealth that might have represented, and it does seem that the board got their antennas up about some of the things that he wanted to do for profit as it relates to chip development and the like here, and maybe that. So I think the
whole thing didn't work, right? I mean, that's pretty much
the structure of the arrangement.
Yeah, that's sort of the conclusion. Look, it's a really, really hard problem because of the power of AI and all the societal questions that it raises. So, famously, OpenAI is this kind of like Frankenstein kind of structure, sort of non-profit, but also very much for profit, with a CEO that doesn't own any equity. I think that the clear conclusion is that has not worked out. And it sort of feels like it needs to be either way, right? Either you have an independent, non-profit company that's focused on safety and humanity, the future of our humanity. And this is immensely important, by the way. And I think the whole detail thing that we were talking about, I think is really important. And it in fact shows that Silicon Valley has soul, in a way that people have accused it to be ruthlessly all about money, but actually that's showing that it has soul. So it either has to be that, or it has to be for profit. It was actually kind of amazing, of all things, throughout the weekend on X, to see people actually say that VCs on boards is a good thing, which was not on my bingo card for 2023, as people have been endlessly making fun of VCs, but the corporate governance is something that is anti-fragile, right? That has evolved over a long period of time through the ups and the downs and the volatility, and there's a reason for that. And it's sort of VCs on boards are not perfect, for-profit incentives are not perfect, but it clearly works.
Isn't it interesting that we're bookending a year, from FTX's collapse in late 2022 to let's essentially say maybe the collapse of OpenAI. And when you think about due diligence, this is a topic that Rick and I have talked a lot about on the pod, and I think that's your point about having VCs on boards. And Sam's board at FTX, there was no corporate governance, and again, very different mission, very different company, and but an odd structure. And there was a lot.
Same first name though, Sam and Sam.
Yeah,
I mean, it means something.
It does mean something. But the way that VCs were throwing money. Okay, or strategics were throwing money and resources at both of these anointed, geniuses, I think is really interesting. So, who knows how this shakes out a little bit. What about from a VC perspective? And this was kind of where I was getting it with maybe some of these researchers or some of these people, if they believe that this is one of the biggest technologies of this century, right? Maybe they don't care. Think about the structure of OpenAI. Think about the founders of this company. Think about the original mission. Are there going to be some brilliant folks that leave that you're going to want to back to do something, really interesting? Like all of a sudden, I could see you becoming extremely busy with the collapse of OpenAI. Some of these people are not going to want to go work at Microsoft or Alphabet or Amazon or Salesforce. That's
and do meetings on Teams.
And do meetings on Teams. Yeah, I mean, I still don't know how. We're 3 years after the pandemic. I don't know how to use Teams.
Look, absolutely. I think. Again, all of this creates lots of opportunities for VCs and entrepreneurs, and I think talent is going to be more available than certainly it was. But still, ultimately, there's a finite number of those people. It's AI, for all the talk about commoditization, is still, in my opinion, very much frontier, deep tech, and there's only so many people in the world that know how to do those things, and they command very high salaries. But yes, there's a bunch of people that are now going to be fair play for some startups.
Well, let's think about it through, again, your lens now as a board member. I'm just going to throw these names out. I'm obviously not asking for anything specific about that you talk to with these companies, but let's say with a Data IQ and a Synthesia, these are companies that have been very active in the space. I'm sure they're active recruiting talent always, that sort of thing, right? They're partnered with probably a lot of these different companies, use their products and services and the like to build and that sort of thing. What are some of the focal points right now? Because I'm sure this has been a busy few days and will continue to be, but it's probably safe to assume there's nothing but greater opportunity right now with some of the fragmentation of one of the biggest players in the space. Yeah,
look, I think the advice for all those companies, as always, when things get very noisy, is to sort of, to the large extent, tune out the noise. Certainly be opportunistic for talent and all those things, but run your own race, heads down, focus on what makes you great. So that's certainly the kind of conversations we've been having with them. Companies like Data IQ are very interesting when things keep moving in all sorts of different directions and unpredictable directions, because ultimately they're a platform. And, at some point, people wanted to run on Hadoop, and then they wanted to run on cloud, and then they wanted to run on Snowflake. And a platform like Data IQ was just able to incorporate those different parts of the ecosystem into their platform. And for generative AI, it's been the same thing. So they released recently an LLM mesh, which is basically an orchestration layer. So they just partnered with Databricks, they partnered with Cohere, they partnered with Pinecone. So they're just plugging all of this into their platform. So I think they're very well positioned from that perspective.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the Mad podcast with Matt Turck, because again, I've been listening to it, and you've had some, it's a confluence of some one-on-one conversations like this, some sort of firesides in public environments. You also obviously run Data Driven NYC, which is something you've been doing for a long time, and you're incorporating a lot of this content that you've been creating under the FirstMark umbrella. But obviously, you have MattTurck.com where you blog too. Talk to us a little bit about what are some of the conversations that you've been having on the podcast? Who are some of the folks that you've you've been having, and how are those likely to change over the next few months or so? Because I feel like these conversations might get a bit more lively on the pod there.
Yeah. So, like I'm a VC, so of course I have to have a podcast. Like I don't make the rules. It's
like you have a Twitter account.
Yeah, exactly. You have to. And it's been a wonderful experience. It's basically an excuse to reach out to all sorts of interesting folks and have one-on-one conversations and learn from them. Look, time and again, I'm struck by the gap between the whole like Twitter zeitgeist kind of conversation and the reality of the conversation that you have with practitioners, whether they are entrepreneurs or researchers and so on and so forth. Let's just take AI doomerism, for example. You see that, obviously a very important topic, but like you see that amplified on social networks everywhere. Meanwhile, all the conversations I have on the podcast or otherwise with people that truly are living and breathing AI from a technical standpoint throughout the day, the topic of doomerism and AI is going to kill us all basically doesn't come up. Like nobody really believes that. People are curious about it, and I want to be responsible.
Elon kind of believes in it a little bit, doesn't he? Or no?
Yeah, look, different people have different agenda. Yeah. Not my words, but somebody was saying that it has a little bit of a savior complex and needs to save humanity from something, and AI is a great thing to save humanity from. So, different people
has he seen 2001: A Space Odyssey? Because it feels like that could be the confluence of a lot of his saviorism, and it doesn't end particularly well. Sorry for the spoiler there.
Yeah. But by the way, I guess I'm surprised that not everybody knows, but Elon was one of the co-founders of OpenAI. I mean, it's sort of amazing.
But he had a big falling out over a lot of these sorts of issues.
Yes, exactly. That was the beginning of the transition from nonprofit to for profit.
Yeah. Well, and last thing, let's hit this a little bit because we haven't even mentioned Meta. Okay, so Meta has this Llama, which is this open source. So can you shed some light a little bit about, again, what OpenAI's mission was, what some of their competitors are doing, and then what Mark Zuckerberg's believe. And Mark Zuckerberg and Elon have famously sparred over AI and the likes, and they have two very different views. But Zuckerberg and Meta have gone down this open source sort of model. So give us a sense for that, and then maybe how some of the companies that you're working with, advising, investing in, are thinking about the open source versus.
So I think that's a super smart move. So Meta, a little bit like Google, was sort of caught flat-footed by the whole thing. In that Meta with Fair in particular has had one of the very, very best AI research teams out there for a long time, led by Yann LeCun in particular. And then the whole ChatGPT thing happened, and it was sort of unclear what Meta was going to do. I think their response has been amazing. So Meta has a long tradition of open sourcing a lot of stuff. Their decision to responsibly open source Llama, in particular Llama 2, was a great idea and very much welcomed by the industry. I think that was particularly important. Before OpenAI, went through this. I think that's even more important. I think we need a rich ecosystem of different startups, different technologies, and yes, some of it can be closed source, but open source is extremely important. So. Obviously, we need to do open source safely because you don't want open source to land in the wrong hands. But I think that's for the future of AI, that's really important. So companies like Hugging Face do a really good job there. I think Meta is playing an immensely important role. And in terms of what we're advising companies, not just the companies we invest in, but the enterprise, sort of the customers that those companies serve, a multi-pronged strategy, sort of the AI version of multi-cloud, I think is what makes the most sense. I think you want to have a combination of commercial models delivered through kind of like a SaaS hosted kind of way, but you want to have your own models. You want to play around and build models based on open source. I think you need to, just not to get yourself in a vendor lock-in kind of situation.
Yeah. All right. So last question here, and again, this is me putting my fast money hat on is, Alphabet, Google. Okay. So, again, this is, a $1.7 trillion market cap company. Again, I think like early this year when we were talking about, what Chat GPT-4 and what that meant, for the landscape in general. At the time, Google Alphabet was trading very poorly. I mean, the stock was, like they had the Bard release that did not go particularly well, and there was like the market, at least public market investors were anointing winners and losers. And it's kind of interesting, that stock was 90, now it's 140-ish or something like that. So it's very near its 52-week highs. They've been perceived behind the eight ball a little bit. They've just pushed out the release of Gemini, so how are you thinking about Alphabet, and are we thinking about it through too short term of a lens here? You know what I mean, a little bit, because I have to assume, Sundar, he's not getting his Satya moment right now, but I feel like there is one for him probably coming in the not so distant future in a way.
Oh yeah, I would 100% not bet against Google Alphabet for sure. I mean, again, all of this is coming from them originally, and I think Bard and Gemini are super important part of the ecosystem. Yeah. And look, there's a DeepMind / Google Research which merged. They have some of the very best minds in the industry, and they have like all the distribution, all the brands. So I think there's like just tremendous potential, and again, like they're one of the big winners of what just happened.
All right, well, listen, that was great. I really just want to kind of attack this through like a slightly different sort of point of view. We really appreciate, obviously, your analysis, because again, you are invested in the space. You've been writing about it, you've been blogging about it, you've been tweeting about it, you've been putting out your Mad Report for 10 years. You are not a Johnny-come-lately. You sit on AI boards. So, Matt, I really appreciate you coming by. You guys, people, please go follow Matt. He's at Matt Turck. That's TURCK on the Twitter. He's also mattturck.com. And obviously, Mad Podcast with Matt Turck. Thanks for joining us on OK Computer. I hope to have you back really soon.
Thanks for having me.